Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live took a startling turn when legendary actor Harrison Ford abruptly walked off set after a tense exchange with the host over Hollywood, politics, and cancel culture. From the moment Ford stepped onto the stage, something felt ... different. The 81-year-old icon, known for his no-nonsense persona and roles as Han Solo and Indiana Jones, carried himself with his trademark stoicism. But behind the cool exterior, there was a flicker in his eyes that hinted this wouldn't be just another routine talk show appearance. Jimmy Kimmel greeted him with his usual charm and a thunderous welcome from the audience. Harrison Ford, everybody, the man, the myth, the legend. Kimmel announced, that classic late-night energy pulsing through his delivery. Ford gave a small, polite nod to the audience, then turned to Kimmel with a steady gaze. At first, the interview unfolded smoothly. They exchanged a few jokes, discussed Ford's latest film project, and touched on his infamous onset injuries. Those stories that had become as much a part of his image as the fedora or the Millennium Falcon. Laughter flowed easily. All was well until it wasn't. Kimmel, always ready to probe a little deeper, pivoted. "You've been in this business for what, 5 decades? You've seen Hollywood change dramatically," he began casually. "What's your take on how the industry handles controversial figures these days?" Ford's face barely changed, but something about his posture stiffened. His jaw tightened just slightly. "What do you mean by that, Jimmy?" he asked, voice calm but edged. Jimmy leaned back, his tone still light, but more deliberate now. "Well, we've seen a lot of actors face consequences for things they've said or done. Some people call it accountability, others call it cancel culture. You've never been one to shy away from your opinions. Do you ever worry about saying the wrong thing?" The question hung in the air. Ford's fingers tightened slightly on the arms of his chair. His reply was measured, but firm. "I think people should be able to express their opinions without fear of having their careers destroyed by a mob mentality," he said. Kimmel's eyebrows lifted, sensing the shift. "That's interesting. So you think some of the people who've been canceled maybe didn't deserve it?" Ford didn't flinch. "I'm talking about the principle. There's a difference between holding someone accountable for real wrongdoing and destroying a person's livelihood because they said something unpopular or made a mistake 20 years ago." The audience, which had been chuckling periodically, now grew noticeably quieter. A few people shifted in their seats. The energy had changed. Kimmel leaned in, pressing forward, not as an entertainer now, but as someone stepping into a deeper, more confrontational conversation. "But Harrison," he said, "don't you think celebrities, people with real influence, have a responsibility to be careful about what they say, especially with sensitive topics?" Ford turned to him, gaze sharper now. "Careful according to who?" "Jimmy, Twitter, a boardroom of execs, a bunch of algorithm-trained interns in Silicon Valley." His voice was calm, but every word landed with precision. "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive. I've seen trends rise and fall. I've seen good people lose everything because of hysteria, disguised as justice." Kimmel's expression hardened slightly. "I wouldn't call holding people accountable for hate speech hysteria," he fired back. "If someone uses their platform to spread discrimination or harmful ideologies, there should be consequences." Tension thickened in the air. Even the camera operators were unusually still, unsure whether to cut or keep rolling. In the control room, producers were reportedly debating whether to force a commercial break. Ford leaned forward now, intensity fully, focused on Kimmel and who decides what qualifies as hate speech. You, the advertisers, the same companies that profit off controversy until it's inconvenient. A pause. Or maybe it's up to talk show hosts who suddenly think they're the moral compass of the world. The jab hit hard. Kimmel's well-practiced smile cracked, replaced with something more guarded. "I think most reasonable people know hate speech when they see it," he said coldly. "We're not debating philosophy here. This is about human decency." Ford gave a low chuckle, not amused, but almost dismissive. "That's a nice phrase. Convenient. Broad enough to mean whatever you want it to mean." By now, the audience was completely silent. This wasn't a charming disagreement between a late-night host and a veteran actor. This was raw, uncomfortable truth-telling, and it was happening live. Ford stood up, without another word. He unclipped his mic and turned toward the wings. The studio sat in stunned silence as he strode off stage. Kimmel, left at the desk, forced a smile as the music kicked in. "We'll be right back," he said stiffly, but there was no coming back from that within hours. Footage of the incident, some shot from cell phones in the audience, circulated online. Headlines exploded across social media. Harrison Ford storms off Kimmel's, set in cancel culture clash. Unfiltered and unapologetic. Ford versus Kimmel, awkward silence as Hollywood legend slams woke media. Reaction was swift and divided. Some praised Ford for his honesty, calling it a rare moment of candor in a heavily scripted world. Others criticized him for downplaying the importance of accountability in the age of misinformation. ABC released a tight-lipped statement. "We value the voices of our guests and the integrity of thoughtful discussion. The segment will not air in full per mutual agreement." But insiders knew that was damage control. By the next morning, Ford had said nothing. No follow-up, no clarification. Just silence. And yet, that silence said everything in a world built on image and optics. Harrison Ford had done the unthinkable. He tore down the set mid-performance and walked away without flinching. Whether you agreed with him or not, one thing was certain. It wasn't just late-night TV that got shaken. It was the entire illusion of what a celebrity interview was supposed to be, and no laugh track could cover it up. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he was losing control of the interview, made a last-ditch effort to steer things back. "Look," he said, trying to reassert authority. "I think we can all agree, racism, sexism, bigotry, those things are wrong. And when public figures promote that kind of behavior, there should be consequences. That's not controversial. Defining the terms of the debate to fit your narrative." Kimmel's face flushed, his practiced late-night composure beginning to unravel. "I'm not defining anything." "Harrison," he shot back, "I'm just saying there are consequences for harmful behavior. That's how society works." Ford let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Society," he echoed. "Or is that how your corner of Hollywood works? Because last I checked, society includes people who don't live in Malibu mansions, who don't get their worldview from industry panels and award show monologues." The jab hit home. Kimmel's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of raw irritation. "That's rich," he snapped. "Coming from someone who's made a fortune playing guys who shoot first and ask questions never. Maybe you're just bitter that the real world has more nuance than your movies." Ford's eyes flared dangerously sharp now. "Me about nuance, Jimmy," he said, voice low and firm. "And don't pretend what you do here is anything more than performance art, designed to make your audience feel superior to people they don't even know." "Performance art?" Kimmel's voice rose, the mask of affable host slipping further with each word. "I'm trying to have honest conversations. Maybe that makes you uncomfortable because you've spent your whole career hiding behind fiction." The studio felt like a live wire, now every breath held in suspension. Cameras zoomed in instinctively, capturing what was quickly becoming history in the making. In the crowd, phones began to appear, though security would later scramble to confiscate footage. Ford stood, slowly, deliberately. His 6-foot frame rose like a mountain from the guest chair, casting a long shadow across Kimmel's desk. "Hiding behind characters," he said, his voice carrying the same cold authority that once made audiences believe in Jedi and adventurers. "Let me tell you something about hiding, Jimmy. When I play a character, I admit it. I own it. I don't pretend to be anything I'm not." Kimmel stayed seated, but leaned forward now, defensive and burning. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Ford said sharply, "you sit behind this desk every night pretending to be a moral compass, but you're not. You're just another entertainer desperate for applause." His words landed like broken glass, sharp, loud, and impossible to ignore. "You take complex issues," he continued, "and you flatten them into jokes, into applause lines. You don't inform, you perform, and in the process, you divide." "I divide." Kimmel's voice cracked slightly, the pressure finally showing. "I'm not the one defending people who spew hate and discrimination. I'm not the one making excuses for bigots." Ford's fists clenched at his sides. "There it is again," he growled. "Anyone who disagrees with you is automatically a bigot. Anyone who questions your methods is accused of defending hate. It's a convenient little trick, isn't it? Shut down the conversation by painting your critics as monsters. The room was frozen. No one moved, no one clapped, no one laughed. This wasn't a show anymore. This was a reckoning. Two men, two worlds colliding in real time. A Hollywood legend who had seen it all and lost patience with the noise, and a host whose job was to entertain but who had stepped into something much deeper, much hotter than he could control. And in that moment, you could feel it. The script had been thrown out, and no one knew what came next. Kimmel stood now, squaring his shoulders to match Ford's imposing height. "Maybe some people deserve to be called monsters," he said, voice rising. "Maybe when you promote ideas that harm others, when you dehumanize entire groups, you forfeit the right to polite disagreement." Ford stepped in closer, eyes hard. "And who made you judge and jury?" he snapped. "When did late night hosts become the arbiters of acceptable thought? When did comedians decide who works and who gets blacklisted?" "We're not blacklisting anyone," Kimmel insisted, but the conviction in his voice faltered. "We're just choosing not to. Platform hate." Ford laughed, a short, bitter sound that echoed off the studio walls. "Not platforming hate," he repeated, his tone dripping with scorn. "You don't mean hate. You mean anyone who doesn't toe your ideological line? Anyone who challenges your narrative? Anyone who dares to think for themselves?" Now, both men stood across the desk like gunslingers at high noon faces, locked eyes unblinking. The studio lights suddenly seemed harsher, casting deep shadows that gave the stage a surreal, cinematic edge. Kimmel's face flushed red. Of media training was gone. "You know what, Harrison? Maybe the problem isn't cancel culture. Maybe the real issue is that people like you can't handle living in a world where your words have consequences, where you can't just say whatever you want without pushback." Ford's eyes narrowed. "Consequences," he repeated, the word like a growl. Funny how that word only ever seems to flow in one direction. Funny how it only applies to people who step outside the lines of your approved script. My approved? If you can't even recognize that, don't you dare lecture me about human rights," Ford thundered, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous rumble. "I've lived through more history than you've skimmed on Twitter. This isn't activism, it's performance, a self-serving monologue so you can feel righteous in a $2,000 suit." The blow landed. Hard Kimmel's face turned from red to purple, veins tightening at his temples. "Performative? I use this platform to speak for the voiceless," he fired back. "I stand up to hate. That's more than you've done hiding behind movie scripts and staying silent when it counts." Ford's composure finally snapped. "Staying silent?" he roared, voice booming so loud a few audience members flinched. "I've been fighting for what's right since before you knew what a camera was. But I did it in the real world, not in a sanitized studio designed for clapter and camera-ready outrage." The room fell utterly silent, just the hum of overhead lights and the whispered panic of producers in the control booth. Security edged closer, uncertain if this was still a segment or something else entirely. Kimmel, sensing he was losing ground, played what he clearly thought was his ace. "Just because you flew planes and did your own stunts doesn't make you some authority on moral courage. You're just another privileged Hollywood relic upset. The world doesn't revolve around you anymore." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Ford didn't move, didn't blink. But something in him shifted, his gaze sharpened into something cold and laser-focused. Privileged Hollywood elite. He said quietly, each word weighed like iron. "That's what you think I am. That's how you dismiss anyone who challenges you. Slap a label on them and pretend their perspective doesn't count." Kimmel saw the opening and lunged. "If the shoe fits," he said, "you've made hundreds of millions pretending to be a hero while real people deal with the fallout from racism, discrimination, actual violence. Maybe it's time you acknowledge your privilege instead of defending those who profit from hate." Ford's hands were trembling now, not from fear, but fury. "You want to talk about privilege," he said, stepping forward. "Let's talk about the privilege of sitting behind that desk every night, pretending to be a moral compass while passing judgment on people you've never met. You don't build, you destroy, with cheap applause lines, with edited monologues. You hide behind your writers and your laugh track and call it courage." The tension was unbearable. Cameras still rolled. The audience was frozen in their seats, and somewhere, everyone watching knew This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about power and the myth of who gets to claim it in front of the camera. Kimmel's voice cracked, the strain audible now. You think you're the only one who faces consequences? I get death threats, Harrison. I get doxxed, harassed, boycotted for speaking out against hate. Don't pretend there's no cost. Ford blinked, slow, disbelieving. My people, he said, stepping forward. There it is, the real Jimmy Kimmel. Everyone who disagrees with you is suddenly part of some faceless mob, some evil collective you're bravely standing against. The temperature in the studio dropped. You can't even imagine, Ford continued, that good people might see the world differently than you. To you, disagreement isn't dialogue, it's an attack. And dissent, it's a threat. This wasn't television anymore. This was something primal, to alpha men decades of pressure, pride, and power, finally colliding. Kimmel didn't blink, but his voice turned shrill. Oh, so now it's different perspectives, he snapped. Is that what we're calling racism now? Sexism? Homophobia? Just alternate points of view? Give me a break. Ford stepped around the desk. The audience gasped. You keep waving those words around like they're magic spells, he said coldly. Racism, sexism, homophobia, they're your talismans. Say them loud enough, and you win the argument by default. He leaned in slightly, voice like steel. But I'm not afraid of your labels anymore, Jimmy. Not your hashtags, not your Twitter mobs, not your cancel culture crusades. Kimmel's reply came low and deliberate. Maybe you should be. Ford's jaw tightened. Is that a threat? Kimmel hesitated, but the moment for retreat had long passed. I'm saying words have consequences. Your words. And maybe it's time you learned that. Ford gave a dark, humorless chuckle. Consequences from you, he said. From a man whose riskiest move is a political joke wrapped in a punchline served to an audience that already agrees. With him, then his voice dropped dead quiet. You've never known real stakes, Jimmy. Never tasted consequences. I have. Silence, the kind that settles before a storm. Producers looked panicked behind the glass. Cameras rolled on. Kimmel, cornered and clinging to his final card, leaned into the moment. You know what? He said. Let's show them who you really are, Harrison. Let's talk about your values, what you stand for when the cameras aren't rolling. Ford's expression didn't change, but his smile turned predatory. By all means, he said. Tell them. Kimmel swallowed. But his ego wouldn't back down. I think you're a man so insulated by fame and fortune that you've forgotten how real people live. I think you defend bigotry because it doesn't affect you. I think you represent everything that's wrong with old Hollywood. Ford didn't flinch. He let the silence sit. Then, slowly, old Hollywood, he repeated. You mean the one that made art instead of propaganda? That told stories instead of delivering lectures? That respected its audience instead of trying to re-educate them? Kimmel opened his mouth, but Ford wasn't finished. Let me tell you something about old Hollywood, Jimmy. It gave you this platform. It built the industry that made you rich, and it understood something you've forgotten. His voice lowered. Entertaining people is a privilege, not a license to indoctrinate them. The studio audience was stone silent, spellbound. Ford stood tall, unwavering. His words cut deeper than any outburst ever could. You want to know what kind of person I am, he said. And the whole room leaned forward because suddenly everyone wanted to know. Ford stepped forward, closing the space until he stood directly in front of Kimmel's desk. The tension was electric. You want to know what kind of man I am? Ford said, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. I'm someone who spent a lifetime trying to earn the audience's trust. I've risked my life, not metaphorically, literally, to give people something real. I've treated those who disagreed with me with respect, not ridicule. Kimmel tried to interject. Harrison, I'm not finished, Ford cut in, his tone slicing through the air with surgical precision. You asked who I am. So let me be clear. I'm the kind of man who doesn't need to tear others down to feel important. I can disagree without dehumanizing. I believe real strength isn't about domination. It's about building something, not burning it to the ground. Each word struck like a blow. Kimmel's face, once flushed with defiance, drained of color. His bravado was gone. He looked around the studio, suddenly unsure, as if hoping for backup that wasn't coming. Ford's voice dropped barely a whisper, but somehow it filled the entire room. And here's the difference between us. Jimmy, when I walk out of here tonight, I'll go home and sleep well, because I know I've lived my life with integrity. Can you say the same? Kimmel opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The host, who had made a career out of quick comebacks and smug monologues, was now utterly speechless. I thought not, Ford said quietly. He adjusted his jacket with slow, deliberate cara-portrait of dignity and control. Then, with piercing clarity, I came here to promote a movie. Instead, I got a glimpse into the soul of modern entertainment. I don't like what I see. He turned toward the audience. No microphone needed. His voice carried effortlessly. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry you had to witness this. You came for entertainment, not a lecture, not a personal take. The toxicity in our discourse doesn't begin with politicians. It begins with celebrities who confuse spotlight with insight. The studio was dead silent. No music, no laughter. Just raw, unscripted drama. Ford turned back to Kimmel one last time. Jimmy, I hope one day you learn the difference between holding someone accountable and trying to destroy them. Real courage isn't punching down on people who can't fight back. It's having the strength to admit when you're wrong. With that, Ford walked off. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the hollow silence of the studio. Kimmel remained frozen, lips parted, eyes wide-recked in real time. Harrison, wait. He finally called out, desperation cracking his voice. We can work this out. Ford stopped at the edge of the stage, turned back slowly. His face was unreadable, but his voice carried a sadness more piercing than anger. No, Jimmy, we can't, because working it out would mean you listening, and you've forgotten how. He disappeared into the wings. The audience sat stunned. Slowly, murmurs began to ripple, then whispers turned into buzz. They knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary, something unscripted, something real. By morning, grainy cell phone footage would explode across social media, despite network efforts to bury it. Within 24 hours, it was trending globally. Within a week, Kimmel's ratings would nosedive as viewers turned away from what many now saw as smug, mean-spirited posturing. For Ford, the moment was a parting shot, a legacy sealed, a final, unshakable statement about principle over performance. For Kimmel, it became a cautionary tale about the difference between having a platform and deserving one. As the studio lights dimmed and the crowd filed out, only one thing was certain. They hadn't just seen an interview. They'd witnessed the death of pretense and the triumph of truth.